Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name's Katie. I'm a full-time sketchbook artist and I use a lot of mixed media, but today I'm going to be focusing on watercolour. My creative intention for 2025 is to develop my skills in that medium, and I'm excited to see how it affects my other art as well. So I've made a few orders. I've got a very exciting haul to share with you today as I set up my starter palette with watercolour. I'm also going to share how I'm learning new skills, and I'm really excited by this, so I hope you are too. I am a complete novice, so please bear that in mind, but I'd love to hear your advice and suggestions as I share my thoughts on watercolour as we go. So let's stop rambling and I'll show you my first foray into proper professional watercolour. So here is everything that I bought in that Jackson's order. I also did an order on Amazon and I got this little watercolour palette. Now this is a little bit smaller than I expected, but I think this will be really good for the colours that I've got. So you can see it's got this metal bit inside and it comes with so many different little pans which I'm going to fill, and then we can pop it in here. It also comes with magnets on the back, so I'm presuming that will help this feel a little bit more secure because that's quite loose. But what I really liked about this is I've got some space for mixing here and two bigger wells here, so I'll probably use this one for like greens and then these ones for the smaller colours that I mix. But I think this will be really useful. So it's quite diddy, but I think that will be good because I do want to use the watercolours for some plein air work at some point. So we'll fill this with these. So here are all the different magnets and here are the little plastic pans. So again, a little bit smaller. I know you can get bigger ones. I presume these are like half size. As I said, I am a total newbie when it comes to watercolours, but I think this will be a good starting point so I can fill these and then add them into my little palette. But more importantly, let me show you what I'm going to fill them with. I didn't go absolutely wild. I did have a look at Liz Steele's blog. She has so much information about watercolour there. She's a real pro, so I'll leave her link down below because I found her blog super helpful. There's loads of information on there about starter palettes and what colours to go for, and I've also got a lot of advice from you guys when I shared that I was going to be going on this watercolour journey in my recent videos. So let me show you what I got. Now, when I ordered this, Jackson's did have a sale on the Schmincke watercolours. So I got this one, which I believe is actually new for this year. So this is the Horadam Aquarelle Buff Titanium. So it says it's signature edition. I'm pretty certain this was a brand new colour because they've brought out a few more. So I'm guessing with most watercolour brands, they'll come out with different shades. And I know that some of these are available in different brands. From what I've read, and as I said, I've tried to do quite a bit of research. There are some brands that do the same, and there are some brands that do shades and have specific pigments specialised to them. So you might not be able to find one colour in another, but they'll probably do like the standard ultramarine and cadmium yellow and that sort of thing. But I really wanted to try this because I think this will be a really nice neutral colour. So we'll swatch these all out later once I've put them in my pans. And I think that will be really helpful for when I am plein air and I'm doing like rocks and things. So excited to try that one. Now I didn't just go for Daniel Smith. This is a reused packaging because I know I did get another Schmincke paint, which was this one. Now I think a lot of people rave about this one. I see a lot of people use it, including my friend Omar Wynn. And this is Potter's Pink. Again, another one that I think will be really fun to use. I think this is one of those where it's not on every brand. So just a really nice, kind of looks brown. I'm going to see how this looks. I think with more water it will look a little bit softer. So I also got this one, again in the 15ml. So because I am totally new to watercolour, I did want to test out a few different brands. So we've got Schmincke, Daniel Smith, and I also got this one from Roman Small. So I think this is a Polish brand, but from what I've heard from all of you, I'm pretty sure the binder is honey. So I'm expecting this to be a little bit wetter than the other ones. This is the only one where I've got it in a pan. So you can buy the other ones in pans, but I went for tubes, but this one only in pans. So I'm really excited to try this colour. This one is 227 Lavender. So excited to test this out. As I said, I'm expecting this to be a bit stickier than the other ones. And then I also got some Daniel Smith. So there were quite a few colours in Daniel Smith that I was really interested in. I didn't want to get loads of greens because although I do use a lot of greens, at the end of last year I was gifted some sample ones from my friend Jodie. So I've got this whole palette of different greens from Schmincke and Daniel Smith colours. So once I decided which is my favourite greens and which one I use the most, then maybe I'll get a tube. But for now, I feel like I've got plenty of greens to keep me going. And I was also looking at a lot of the colours that Liz Steele recommended, and a lot of them were in this set, which is the Praful Savant Master Artist set. Now I know I've totally butchered that name, so apologies, but this comes with a set of 6, and this was a really good price. Now they are only 5mm tubes, but I think that will be plenty. Watercolour is quite expensive, but as someone very wisely pointed out, it will last you a very long time because obviously you can re-wet it, it's water soluble, and I think that this will keep me going for a very good amount of time, and it's great for me to start with. So I'll show you the colours in here. Oh, cute, a little free sticker as well. So they are based in Seattle, Washington, so that's good to know. I think Daniel Smith is easier to get over there in America, but it is quite popular over here in the UK too. Okay, I'm going to try and hold these up. So we've got New Gamboge, which is a lovely warm yellow, kind of orangey. Pyrrole Orange, which again, very deep orange. Ultramarine Blue, Raw Sienna, Burnt Sienna Light, and Undersea Green. Pretty sure that Undersea Green was one that Jodie put for me in the little sample set, and I know that one was really, really nice. Definitely my kind of green. But mostly for these other colours, I think they'll be really good for me to be able to mix up. So quite diddy, especially compared to the bigger ones. But I think this will be a really good place for me to start my palette. And then I also got this one, which is Hansa Yellow Medium. This one was recommended by Liz Steele. This one seems like a really lovely yellow. And I also want to try and mix this with the Ultramarine Blue. Again, because of Liz Steele, who made a really gorgeous green from that. So I'm really looking forward to mixing with this and using it on its own. So those are all of the watercolours that I'm starting out with. You can see up here I've got my Gansai Tambi watercolours. I've been told off on YouTube to not call them watercolours. So basically I started with Kuretake Gansai Tambi paints when I was sort of more interested in watercolours, but they are completely different because they act more like gouache, so they're very, very opaque. But for me, these little pans, and they are very well loved, were a great sort of in-between between me going from gouache to watercolour. It was quite a big jump, so I think for me that was a really good middle ground. I've really enjoyed working with them, and that's made me more excited to work with actual professional watercolours. So I hope that makes sense, but let's move on to the next step. Okay, so here's my plan of action. I'm not going to use this because to me that was just too fiddly. The little pans kind of clip in and it does move about unless you've got the magnet on the bottom, but I don't know, I just feel like this will get in the way. So all I've done is put the magnet on the bottom of these and then I've put them in there. I do kind of wish I had bigger pans, so this one from the Roman Small feels like the better size, but I've also got to remember I need to learn to walk before I can run. So just a small amount of watercolour, I think, for me to work out what colours I use is going to be really helpful, because if I put all of this 5mm into one of those, it probably would take all of it. So I think this is a better way for me to work out, especially as a beginner, on what colours I'm going to be using, and then I can always swap these out with different colours as I find my feet. So one of the other things I want to do is do 2 pans of the yellow, so this Hansa Yellow Medium. I want to have one pan as like a clean yellow and another as a dirty yellow, so the one that I will use to mix my greens, because I'm not very good, I already know that, of keeping my palettes nice and clean. So to keep this yellow clean, I really like the idea of having 2, and again I got that from Liz Steele, so do 1 clean and then 1 which will be my dirtier one. And then I'll also mix up, if I've got enough of the Ultramarine Blue. I did get a sample one from Casa of the Ultramarine as well, so I might use this one to mix the green that I want. So I think that's everything. Let's do a time lapse of me filling this, and then we'll move on to how I'm actually learning watercolour. This Roman Small paint, I just had to take off the outer packaging, peel off that top layer. This looks super satisfying, obviously it's already dried in there. And then I'm using my tubes and filling my little pans. Now, I don't know if I'm doing this right, so I welcome your tips here, but I did mark the edges, so I just used a marker pen there just to write on the colours so I don't forget in abbreviations, and I think that will definitely help because watercolours do look different when swatched than when they're in the pans. So I'm trying different ways to fill these by doing the corners like I am here with this yellow. So please do share if I'm doing this wrong or not. I did find it easier to squeeze in the larger tubes. And then here is where I am mixing my own. So I'm using that yellow and the ultramarine blue to mix this really lovely green. Very satisfying seeing that come together. And I'm looking forward to testing that out. So I already put magnets on the bottom so they just snap really nice and easily into the palette and I can swap them around without any issues. You can see all of the labels I put on the left hand side. But let's talk about how I'm learning to use watercolour as a medium. The painting exercises I'm doing here are from a Skillshare class by my friend who I mentioned earlier, Omar Wynne, who's such a talented artist and an expert on watercolour. Because I want to explore this medium in 2025, it just makes sense to learn from the best, and I'm excited to share that Skillshare are helping me on my path to learning watercolour this year. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, filled with thousands of classes in things like graphic design, photography and illustration, which also covers specialisms like character design, hand lettering and of course watercolour. As well as Omar's class, which is called Back to Basics Watercolour Fundamentals, I've also loved watching Watercolour in the Woods, a beginner's guide to painting the natural world by Rosalie Hazlett. This class is part of Skillshare's learning path called Watercolours for Beginners, which is a curated class collection to master a specific skill, so it's perfect for me to get to grips with this medium. Nature is my go-to subject when it comes to painting, so it felt like the perfect step to combine something new with something I love. The fern I'm painting is thanks to Rosalie's class, and I really focused on my mixing and layering. Watercolour involves a lot more patience than I'm used to with other paint, but it was so satisfying seeing this come to life. Alongside the skills and techniques Omar shared, I feel like I'm well on my way to understanding more about these paints, and there are plenty more classes on Skillshare that I'm excited to take next. The first 500 people to use the link in my description box will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So if you've been thinking of trying watercolour or a whole different medium or skill, then Skillshare has you covered. We're going to come back to this spread later, but for now, let's swatch out all the colours so you can see everything I've got in my palette. Okay, here we go. Here is my finished palette. So as you can see, I could fit in another row of the little pans, so I could move these over to the side and fit in some more. But for a starter palette, I'm really happy. Maybe I've gone overboard, but I think this is a really good range of colours. So you'll have seen all of the colours that I used. I did split out the Hansa yellow medium, and I've put one deliberately next to the green, so I know that's the dirty one, and I've kept this one over here, so that's the clean one. But I've tried to make it work, so I've put the blues together, the greens, the yellows that I'll use mixing with the greens, and kind of done it that way. And I really like it. I think it's very satisfying looking at it like this. And now the next thing to do is to swatch them out and then use them. So obviously the paints are still quite wet when I put them into the pans, and as we go forward they will definitely dry out, and I've heard that spraying with a spritzer is helpful to get the medium to come up a little bit better. But here I'm just testing them out, so I'm trying to put them down quite opaque on the left, and then I'm using more water, and it's amazing just how different these can look. This is the pale orange I'm putting on here, which kind of has a much more pinky tone than I was expecting. So it's really, really helpful to swatch your mediums and really see the differences and how things can affect it, including how much water you're adding and also the colour of the paper you're using it on. So this is a white sketchbook. This is the Clairefontaine I'm working in, and I definitely prefer it on the rougher paper. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when I'm filling my earlier spread, but I really enjoyed this. It's very satisfying doing swatches anyway, but also really helpful for me to test how they feel. Here I'm doing some mixing, so I'm actually just taking a couple of the colours and mixing them together. I think that some of them have got more granulation, so you can see on the left, and some of them are a little bit smoother, so definitely a learning thing, and I'm excited to test out more combinations as we go. So we're back to the spread that I started earlier with Rosalie's class, and I wanted to include some more nature studies just around it using some of the techniques that I picked up. I really enjoyed working in this way. I do find that it's different to what I'm used to, and I'm excited to sort of test it out with bigger brush strokes and more landscapes, but as I said earlier, I need to learn to walk before I can run, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm really excited to be on this journey and to increase my skills. So you can see I'm just using my palette over there, and I'm referencing a book called The Illustrated Book of Trees just to do some of these new references. The fern was from the class, but everything else around it is from that book. And I really enjoyed it. It was very meditative. I really love painting nature, as you know, but it was nice to really focus on the layers here. So I had to wait for each layer to dry first before I then came on with my details. And I also used a brush that was a lot smaller than normal, so I could be a bit more precise. I don't know if I'll do that all the time, but it was really helpful for me, especially when I'm learning it, to try out different things and work out what works best. I kept going into my palette to change up the shade, so I would add more yellow and then I would add more green, and I think that creates a bit more, this isn't realistic, but it feels a bit more realistic when you're changing up the tones and layering different things on, because in nature it's not going to be such a flat colour, and I don't want a flat opaque colour for this page. So I did notice quite a lot of difference between the Kuretake Gansai Tambi paints and the watercolour, so I can really see why people are very passionate about the difference, because it is very different. It's definitely not as opaque, and as I said, it dries differently and you do have to build up the layers slowly. So I think that's going to be my biggest lesson this year, is to work on my patience and just build things up slowly and watch it come to life, rather than having that sort of quick win that I do get when I'm putting down gouache, for example. It's really nice to see the blending as well, so I feel like that's a definite win with watercolour and something I don't get with other mediums, and really see the paints interact together, and some of it is quite unpredictable, so I think that will be fun to play with as well. I do really enjoy doing wet on wet, so you can see the colour underneath this pine cone where the colours were blending together, so some lighter areas and some darker ones, and then once that's dry, that's when I'm coming in with this detail on top just to add in the different shading, and that's really nice. So there's loads of different ways I can use watercolour, and I'm really excited to try lots of different ones this year. I am coming to the end of this sketchbook as well, and I did find that the watercolour felt better on the rougher side. So with these Clairefontaine sketchbooks, there's a rough side and a smooth side, and I found it worked much better on the rougher side. So I am definitely a smooth sketchbook person, but I feel like now I'm using watercolour, I'll get used to the rougher texture, and it didn't dry quite as fast. So when I was doing some of the swatches on the left, it definitely dried a lot quicker than the other ones on the right. So hopefully that makes sense, but I would love to hear your sketchbook recommendations for watercolour. I know that Omar uses a lot of Hannah Mueller sketchbooks, so if you agree with that, then please do share in the comments, because I'm looking at those for my next sketchbook when I'm using watercolour. But I'd love to know, because as I say, I am definitely still a beginner, and I know a lot of you have a lot of experience with this, so please do share any sketchbook recommendations down below in the comments. I'm finishing up this spread just with a few labels using my black ink pen, just to finish it off and kind of give a handbook sort of almanac feel. I love adding little labels and learning more about nature anyway, but also making my sketchbook feel a little bit more personal. I'm just adding a little title in the corner. The eagle-eyed among you will notice I put the wrong date, so I still feel like we're in 2024, but we are in 25, so I noticed that later and fixed that up as well. But I really love how this spread turned out. It's been really fun playing with watercolour, and I've absolutely loved setting up my first watercolour palette for the first time, and hopefully you've enjoyed watching too. Here's an overview of how the final spread looks with my tests on the left, and then part of the Skillshare class and my other nature studies on the right. I really can't wait to do more experiments this year, and hopefully you'll be along for the ride. Thank you to you for watching, and also a big thank you to my patrons. Without them I couldn't do this YouTube channel, so shout out to them, and I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video, and I hope you have a lovely week ahead. See you later.